I'm not gonna lie, I've got an unhealthy obsession with this game. And honestly, I've been exponentially increasing my appreciation for this 17-year-old title. Game Freak unfortunately hasn't been in touch with their fans recently, at least their older fan base. The smell of money stinks too well in their mobile gaming ventures, which, by the way, I'm not downright dismissing the quality of. I won't pretend that I didn't seem interested in Pokemon Go when it first came out. Everyone was. I played the app like crazy when it first came out, and I was like, oh, it's pretty cool, but why don't I just play a real Pokemon game? The mainline games that got this company so popular in the first place. But I do think Pokemon Go was an interesting risk for the franchise. One that paid off handsomely. So much money. It even got the franchise to the silver screen. And it actually wasn't that bad of a movie. I've always wondered if the interest in the mobile gaming market is what contributed to these lackluster Pokemon titles we've been getting recently, that pale in comparison to any of the older Pokemon games, especially when it comes to the amount of polish and replay value. Categories that Sword and Shield fail miserably. Unless you buy the DLC packs, of course. Then you can get your dig on the new martial arts Pokemon that can, Mighty Morph for Gigantamax. I mean, once you activate the, $30 for this? We have yet to figure out if they're making more DLC expansion passes. Oh, Game Freak. Has it really come to this? Pokemon requiring DLC? I felt the same way about Final Fantasy 15 and its DLC, but at least Square made sure the presentation of their games are high quality, even if they always hide things nowadays behind a paywall. I mean, many companies do that with DLC, but it's so sad to see a company as beloved as Game Freak give in to the pressure of slacking off. Hiding behind a paywall as an excuse for not finishing your game is sickening. I can accept DLC if it contributes towards the game as what DLC was intended for. Additional content. Things that you don't have to have. And without the downloadable content, the game is still considered complete. You don't need a DLC to fully experience what the game has to offer, and buying it can only enrich your experience with said game, but it's not supposed to complete the pie of any game. However, the DLC for Sword and Shield, Isle of Armor, it's honestly like a piece and a half of apple pie that was already spoiled for a few days. It's like, at that point, why even bother? It's clear they didn't add it in the original game because they didn't have time. And they didn't have time because they were too busy making that other JRPG no one asked for, which ironically enough has a better presentation than their actual mainline Pokemon game. The fact that they got another DLC pack planned, and who knows however many more. Again, I really want to know, did Game Freaks? No. How about the Pokemon Company? Did their interest in the mobile gaming market doom the quality of their mainline titles? Because just as Pokemon got more focused on Go and now this BS Tencent MOBA game, it seems they've put less quality and time into their more recent mainline games. If you line up the dates, this all happened at the same time. It can't be a coincidence. But, could you blame them? Money, as with any company, is their ultimate goal. They make more of it with mobile games while doing less effort. It's highly more efficient, logical, and allows Pokemon to stay on top as the biggest media franchise in the world. But, yeah, this is a deep blow to fans. Yeah, again, it's logical and business is booming, but their old-time fans are hella sour. I can firmly say the reason I like Pokemon was because it stood out amongst the sea of JRPGs. It was accessible and fun to play for both casual and serious players, and breathed in beautiful polish and incredible game design that would help shape JRPGs for so many newcomers, yours truly. Now that Game Freak has found their golden hen that requires the least amount of effort to maintain, they've been abusing the hell out of it. What golden hen, you may ask? Kids. Kids are the majority of their consumer base, and they love these games for how easy they are, I guess. Look, I'm not attempting to generalize a large group of people, but I feel like Game Freak's doing that because how else can you explain their decision to give us so many fucking handouts? Kanto starters, free Lucario with its Mega Evolution Stone. I don't need this, no thanks. This game is already easy enough. Why are you telling me what's super effective? I know water beats fire. What kind of move? What the fuck? Game Freak knows their market and who they're developing for. Maybe they don't get the final say here, but they're definitely responsible for that garbage piece of pie. They've been responsible for the decline in Pokemon games for years now. It was nice to see that we got Pokemon Snap 2. That was pretty unexpected, but see, this game is not made by Game Freak. I knew it right away. From the polish, animations, they definitely outsourced this elsewhere. There was a time, believe it or not, when Game Freak actually cared about making polished games and wanted to push the JRPG genre with their IP. They took risks, implementing more and more features as the series got more convoluted, while they made the big bucks, which they rightfully deserve with their glorious mainline entries and remakes. Spin-offs were made by other companies, like with Pokemon Snap 2 that I mentioned earlier. The original was developed by HAL Laboratory, and its sequel coming out for Switch is getting made by Bandai Namco. They've been having a pretty hot streak lately with Pokemon, come to think of it. So, hot stuff. Another company they requested the assistance of for making Pokemon spin-offs was Genius Sonority. They wanted this Japanese game developer studio to make a home console counterpart to their Hoenn region games, which are already doing amazing. I should know actually, Emerald was my first Pokemon game, and I love it. The predecessors for this game, however, Pokemon Stadium and Stadium 2 on the N64, were developed by different companies, so this was Genius Sonority's first Pokemon game, and for that matter, first game they ever made. The company was founded solely for developing Pokemon spin-off games for home consoles, but would later go on to work on other JRPGs, like Dragon Quest. This was their first game they ever made, and I love it. I would go as far as saying this is my favorite Pokemon game of all time. Yeah. I know that's something a lot of people won't agree with, and there's a lot of evidence to the contrary. Oh, so much. If you want to know why though, why I can ignore all that, I guess I could tell you. I've got you this far in the video after all, I don't see why not. Not only is this my favorite Pokemon game, but it's also the hardest I've ever played. Back in a time when Pokemon was actually difficult. I know there are a lot of people out there who don't consider Pokemon to be a difficult gaming series at all, and refer to this franchise as baby's first JRPG. But I can confidently tell you, after all my years of gaming with JRPGs, this game is difficult alright. By difficult, I mean rage difficult, and actually required some skill and patience to be had. Ah man, I love this game. While you're here, why not make some nice buttery smooth popcorn and get a drink in there? This'll be a long video, but hey, it's not something I haven't done before. Like, comment, subscribe if you want to, but you don't have to. Or, you know, you don't have to eat anything. How about we just dive into the Ore region already? A place so barren and deserty, yet filled with some beautiful shit you can't find elsewhere in the Pokemon universe. Damn, I love this water fountain. I can taste the water. If you live in Phoenix, Arizona, well, you'll be right at home here, since this game is literally based off of that area. Welcome to the beautiful and desert wasteland that's infested with criminals. Pokemon Colosseum. Easily the darkest world Pokemon has ever had for their games. Pokemon Colosseum starts out with the main protagonist, who I named Wes, stealing a mysterious machine from a place known as the Snag'em Hideout. He used to work for Snag'em, a criminal organization that steals Pokemon from other trainers. But for some reason, Wes turns traitor and steals a gadget from them known as the Snag Machine. More on that later. Damn, he's a badass. Look at that smile. This is probably the most badass thing I've ever seen in Pokemon, so yeah, this is nice. So anyways, Wes escapes with his trusty Umbreon and Espeon and seeks refuge at a small pub. After battling a terrible trainer who stalks you, you follow a mysterious group of dudes who have a strange duffel bag in their vehicle. It turns out they kidnapped some woman who I named as Rui. She was kidnapped because she had the ability to see something known as Shadow Pokemon. Shadow Pokemon are creatures that have had their hearts artificially closed, as evidenced by the black aura around them, and they are essentially much stronger versions of their base forms. So this Makuhita here as a Shadow Pokemon is stronger but more unstable than a regular Makuhita. Shadow Pokemon are spread throughout the game, and many different trainers have been given Shadow Pokemon by the bad guys, which happen to be another criminal organization that goes by Cypher. The guys with these masks are in league with Cypher, and the guys our main protagonist escaped from was Snag'em. Different organizations, but both are bad. The tech Wes stole from Snag'em's hideout, the Snag Machine, allows a normal Pokeball to be converted into a Snag Ball, and that said Snag Ball can then be used to steal other trainers' Pokemon. So with the tech we've got here, coupled with Rui's ability to see these different kinds of Pokemon, it's up to the player to find and capture all 48 Shadow Pokemon spread throughout the game, and take away the Shadow part of them. That is, the ultimate goal is to purify and restore these Pokemon to what they originally were. Although, to defeat the main game, you just have to make it to the final boss. You don't have to snag all Shadow Pokemon. But you do have to snag some, as there are no wild Pokemon in this game. You're confined with only having a team out of these 48 Pokemon shown right here. Yep, all of these Pokemon you basically steal from the bad guys. Damn. There are no wild Pokemon in this game. You can only steal Shadow Pokemon from trainers, not actual regular Pokemon that other trainers use because it wouldn't be ethical, I suppose. Regardless, Rui won't even let you steal other people's Pokemon anyways, which is kind of annoying, but I get it. If the game wants it to be that way, then so be it. The reason you want to purify these Pokemon, or purify as many as you can, is so that you can build a proper team of 6 Pokemon to use throughout the many battles you go through. Shadow Pokemon cannot gain experience, at least. They can hold in the experience points, but they refuse to actually change levels, and have a number of problems when using them. Catching them can be such a bitch though, since you've got to focus on weakening them while killing the rest of the opponent's team. But given the Shadow Pokemon's insane move, Shadow Rush, which inflicts damage on any kind of Pokemon, regardless of their typing, it becomes a real hassle. The move also has recoil for attacking Shadow Pokemon, which can easily mess up your chances of catching them in the first place. If you somehow mess up catching Shadow Pokemon, you can always rebattle that trainer and have another chance at getting the Shadow Pokemon back. I know I had to do so for a number of them, simply because it was impossible to catch a few Pokemon while I was playing throughout the game. The AI is just too good, or too stupid. Sometimes they intentionally know when you're trying to steal their Pokemon and make sure to do anything they can to make you fail. There's that, and then just in general, the catch rate is just atrocious. It's nothing like what we've got in the newer games. Back when I was a kid, I would just mash A, even though that probably didn't help my chances. But even if you catch one, purifying them is another adventure altogether. One way to cleanse their heart is to fight with them, and the purple meter here slowly goes down with each fight you use it for. It needs to go all the way down in order to fully purify a Pokemon. However, during fights, sometimes they would go into hyper mode. Ah fuck, look at me, I've got a double whammy here. So what happens now is that your Shadow Pokemon is even stronger than before, but because it's in this weird maddened state, it can actually hit itself in confusion for no reason. So you gotta call the Pokemon out. By calling them, you can lower the Shadow meter significantly, but at the cost of a turn, leaving the Pokemon completely defenseless for an attack. Another way to purify a Shadow Pokemon is to use cologne massages. They mitigate battling other Pokemon, but you need money to buy them. They lower the Shadow meter as well, and are time saving. You can also use a Time Flute, which allows for Celebi to come out of nowhere and purify your Pokemon, regardless of where you're at with the Shadow meter. They feel more like cheating though, since you don't have to do anything with the Shadow meter. But there are only a few flutes in the game you can find, so they're meant to be used for harder Shadow Pokemon that take a while to purify. The best method I've found for purifying Pokemon is to simply unplug your Gamecube controller. Yes. So basically, if you hold your control stick towards the edge of this cliff here, and unplug your controller from the Gamecube, and then plug the controller right back in, but hold the control stick in the reverse direction, the screen will keep on shaking and you can just sit there and enjoy yourself. Basically, the amount of steps you take in-game can also help purify Shadow Pokemon, and this glitch right here can get your whole team of Shadow Pokemon purified in a jiffy. Nice shit. I abuse this like crazy. It saves a lot of time. If you're wondering why the term Shadow Pokemon may sound familiar, in Pokemon Go, the mobile game also had Shadow Pokemon that dealt more damage and fast and charge attacks. That entire concept came from this game, Pokemon Colosseum. Anyways, so the whole point of the game is to fight against both evil crime syndicates and save as many Shadow Pokemon as you can. Along the way, you'll find helpful companions and meet funny and somewhat realistic NPCs that have a bit darker dialogue than your average Pokemon game. Makes sense, I suppose. After all, this isn't just any Pokemon region. Or it's littered with criminals, rogues, thugs, people with Pokemon fighting machines that are intent on smuggling more and more Pokemon. Yeah, not a friendly place to collect all 8 badges. I don't even think this place has a Pokemon League. That's not your role anyways. There is no true champion to face here, although there is a big bad guy you gotta beat down. And oh man, he's hard. That's the gist of this game. But why do I like it so much? One of the main reasons I like this game is because of the protagonist, Wes. You're not a 10-year-old kid journeying around the region, having a playful but somewhat progressively difficult adventure that takes you throughout Pokemon gyms, Elite Four, Champion, and minor inconveniences along the way with Team Pants. No, you're a 17-year-old badass who already has a criminal record and wants to clear his name against the very same people who made him into one in the first place. Although it's unclear as to why Wes fights back against the evil in this game, even though he himself has history of once allying with these thugs. He's changed his mind and he wants to save all the Shadow Pokemon and turn them back into normal Pokemon. As far as silent protags go, this one's got some personality. Oh, that fucking smile is so sick. The design too for this character is really awesome, and reminds me a little bit of Final Fantasy VII. That's not too surprising since Pokemon Colosseum was actually inspired by elements of Final Fantasy VII and Persona 2. That definitely shows, with the more serious overtones in the dialogue and story. I keep mentioning that this game is dark, but how exactly? Well, The entire concept of forcing Pokemon to be these fighting machines is one thing, you the player having to purify them is a positive, but the very idea of dealing with street thugs and gang members throughout the story, with you yourself playing as a character who had ties to the very same people who have done awful things to Pokemon, really makes you wonder just who is the real bad guy here. Villains in this game are a lot more sinister looking, and their Pokemon selection really does emphasize on that. The overall atmosphere in this game is very shady and depressing, with some areas having the majority of its population resorting to a life of crime, like here in Pyrite Town. The town's police force can barely hold on, with criminals constantly breaking out of prison. Most criminals here end up working for Cypher, the crime syndicate I mentioned earlier. Many people here were gifted with Shadow Pokemon as a prize for beating the area's Colosseum. More on that later. That's why the game sends you here to round up as many Shadow Pokemon as you can at the beginning of the game, since most of the thugs who have these fighting machines exist solely here. What's worse is that below this town there's an even shadier society known as the Under, a subterranean city that's completely ruled by none other than, again, Cypher. Because the inhabitants of this underground city have never been above before and have a life down here, they've been brainwashed into serving Cypher and live their lives believing that Cypher is the only righteous thing in the world, and that smuggling Pokemon and turning them to Shadow Pokemon forcibly is actually a good thing. The only voice of reason down here are these children, collectively known as the Kids Grid. They're a revolutionary television network that's desperately trying to get attention from our authorities that Cypher is actually evil and ruling the region. It ends up broadcasting their information to people in the above civilization as well, with only children on the receiving end truly understanding their motives. Children in this game seem to be the biggest voice of reason. So while you go on your adventure in this game, you end up helping Kids Grid as you work together and uncovering more Shadow Pokemon. This guy's a pretty good programmer. They become quite the trusty allies. Again, in a world filled with gangsters, thugs, rogues, children at the end of the day are the only voice of reason. Sure, there are other friendly characters that you meet who aid you in your quest to snag Shadow Pokemon, but these kids end up largely outshining anyone else, given the maturity they've developed in light of realizing just how corrupt and dark their environment is, forcing them to ultimately grow up prematurely. Character arcs like that seem to be a reoccurring thing in multiple Pokemon games, but no Pokemon game I've ever seen up until then has gone this deep and nuanced with its plot. Some would say I'm looking a bit too much into the plot of a Pokemon game out of all things, but you know, the subtleties are there. Sure, this isn't Shakespearean level of thematic excellence, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying for a kid's game, a Pokemon game, a plot that tries to take itself more seriously was enough to intrigue me as a kid. The idea that such a world exists within Pokemon was insane for me as a kid when I first played this game. This was certainly a different and new way to experience Pokemon. Playing as an anti-hero with not one but two evolutions as starters, journeying around to essentially undo whatever work West may have contributed to this dark and lonesome world of the Ore region before he snapped back and became a good guy is something that I find intriguing and interesting. It gives depth to an otherwise bland but badass protagonist, and really makes you wonder what life was like for him before he became a good guy. That feeling of moral ambiguity for the protagonist still gets me. Normally a Pokemon protag is supposed to be a blank slate so that the player can insert themselves in, but here the developers try to make Wes interesting and have some kind of narrative, as subtle as it may be. Your partner Rui also has quite the backstory, as she was kidnapped for being able to see Shadow Pokemon, but also the idea that she was dragged halfway across the desert just to be taken away for good by Cypher admins is, well, it's not as bright as a traditional Pokemon journey. What's more, you actually do get to see her grandparents worried for her sake and fearful of the sheer might and power Cypher has over the entire region. Usually in Pokemon games you don't ever get a sidekick, but this game grants you that for the sole purpose of having a way for Wes to figure out what is and isn't a Shadow Pokemon. She follows you around for the entire game, latching right behind you as you traverse through the many dreary and mysterious locations this game offers. Sometimes you can even get Rui to stop following you if you clip her on the edge, like I'm showing you here. Alright, I'm just gonna go around here. Yeah. Man, this is strangely a lot of fun. Ha, gotcha. No, get back here. Yeah. Double prizes, man.
How you doing down there, neighbor?
This game is hard. So remember how I mentioned earlier that you only had these 48 Pokemon to choose from for your team? It doesn't help that the majority of these Pokemon aren't even that strong, aside from the 3 legendary dogs, Tyranitar and Metagross. But you get these guys much later in the game. Besides Umbreon and Espeon, these Pokemon are all you get. I don't know if it's just me, but the selection of Pokemon is horrible. You do get access to one of the 3 Johto starters, and some decent Pokemon here and there, but I mean, I got nothing against Johto, alright? I really don't. Heart Gold is actually my favorite main series game of all time. I love the region. The only region I dislike is Kalos, but that's mostly because it hardly had much to offer, since it was the first full-fledged 3D Pokemon game by Game Freak. My problem I initially had with this selection is that it doesn't include my personal favorite Pokemon. Because we're stuck with these Pokemon, I'm forced to use a Quagsire as my primary water type, since I didn't choose a Croconaw early on in the game. Which is fine, I guess, but yeah, I really don't like using him. I'd rather have a Starmie, Poliwrath, or Golduck even, but the game doesn't allow you to have any of those. It would be the best of both worlds if I could use the Pokemon I want while playing through the main game. But I suppose that was the idea, right? This isn't your ordinary Pokemon game. They purposely want to make sure you suffer with decent to slightly shitty Pokemon, all for the sake of making the game harder. And I love it actually. A lot of people look at this as a flaw, but I find this to make the game a lot more fun. Keep in mind though, the logical reason most Shadow Pokemon here were from Johto was because Game Freak knew from Gen 3 there were no other Pokemon that preserved Gen 2 Pokemon in this generation. Since it was impossible to transfer Game Boy Color to Game Boy Advance, Game Freak had to make sure all available Pokemon at the time was spread evenly throughout their many games they made for the Gen 3, which at the time happened to only include the mainline Hoenn games and Colosseum. The void of Kanto Pokemon would be later filled by Fire Red and Leaf Green, as well as Colosseum's sequel. In the end though, I actually enjoyed the limited selection of Pokemon in this game. Never in a million years would I have a Quagmire or a Furret on my team. Maybe in the beginning of a mainline game, or just to simply catch them to fill the decks. But to actually use these kinds of Pokemon is something I would never dream of doing. But since I'm left with these choices, I forced myself to adapt to these Pokemon, only to realize how entertaining it can be to limit yourself. I suppose this is why people like to do Nuzlocke all the time, although I don't even know how you would conceive a Nuzlocke for this game. Well, I know how, I just don't want to think about it. What makes this game even harder is how your foes always have a better selection of Pokemon. They always have what I would want to use, or just a more well-rounded team that actually requires skill to maneuver. I've lost too many times to count, simply because the AI caught me off guard on one little move. I'm also always underleveled and outmatched by the quality of the foe's Pokemon, as compared to mine. Grinding levels in this game is a must, unlike most recent Pokemon entries. You only have a few options to do so, since there isn't a wild patch of grass anywhere in this region. You can go to Mount Battle and train there. It's a series of 100 battles that you can go through to help train your Pokemon. If you beat it, you can actually unlock a Ho-Oh at the very end, so it's clearly intended for completion after you beat the main game. But it's still badass and a great place to train. You can also enter Colosseum battles. Colosseum. There are 4 battles, with healing breaks in between, where you can level up and fight against random trainers consecutively. And there are easy Colosseums, and then there are really fucked up ones where the enemies really know what they're doing. I would say these are all worth it. You can get a lot of money in the end. There are a few Colosseums spread throughout the region, and more will open up after you beat the whole game, so there's a wide variety of Pokemon battles to have. In Phoenix City, the place you uncover your first Shadow Pokemon, there's also something called the Justy Gym. It's the ORS region's attempt at having a Pokemon gym that other regions in the Pokemon universe excel at much better. Justy is a guy who helps you train your Pokemon, with different trainers who have Pokemon centered around a specific typing. And there are also just random trainers you can fight with too, but most of the time they're too underleveled to really help you, and the time it takes for their interest in battling to respawn is really annoying. Although sometimes you can exit and enter back into a town or city to get them to battle you. It just takes a while though. Out of all these options, I prefer Colosseums, as you get the best bang for your buck, having multiple battles back to back with people who have 3 or 4 Pokemon. I haven't mentioned what I like about all of this, but since you're probably wondering that, I'll be happy to inform you that I really like the gameplay. This is a contentious subject, an already contentious video. Just bear with me here. There are good things and bad things about this, and I'll talk more about the latter later, but I really do like how animated the Pokemon are. They feel full of life, and the models and animation represent that as they perform each and every attack. I honestly feel like these are real animals, and when they faint, it's almost like they're actually dying. The way they sway their bodies until life leaves them. Damn, that's kinda nice. Creepy, but nice. When I was a kid, I knew I just had to bust my Hoenn team in there. This was my Pokemon Stadium, in the sense that this game was my first exposure to 3D Pokemon models. I was in awe at how animated and alive they looked, compared to the pixelated mess on my Game Boy screen. Although I'm not saying the pixelated art was bad, that's actually been a pretty strong suit of Game Freak over the past few years, and it's aged rather well. Again, I was in awe. This looks so cool. All the 3D models have unique animations for all their moves and shit. It was awesome. It's a lot better than what we got in Sword and Shield right now. Even though the geometry is better on the more recent models, the animations and overall signs of life have greatly diminished, even though Sword and Shield is supposed to be newer. I understand that they got so many Pokemon to add in, but adding in more life and even the idle animations would have gone a long way. The Pokemon in Sword and Shield aren't even sized properly. In Colosseum, they went out of their way to properly measure and give correct height and depth to each and every Pokemon, based on the official Pokédex entries. But in the more newer games, it seems all they really care about is having the trainer not being dwarfed by the Pokemon. Also, some of the backdrops in Colosseum are really highly detailed and made the fights really cool to experience. There are unique environments for each area you visit, and the developers took a lot of time to make them all, which adds a nice touch. They feel so immersive, seeing all these fights take place in such a large and expansive area where you get to see your Pokemon all correctly scaled. They took a note off of Pokemon Stadium, of course, but it's so cool now to see a trainer beside their Pokemon in such a big landscape. In Sword and Shield, however, everything's all shrunk and scrunched up. It honestly makes battles in the more newer games really boring to watch. I could understand that they went for this more tight and compact battle environment for the handheld 3DS games, as they were, well, handheld, but they have no excuse for their Switch titles. It would have been badass to relive what Colosseum and Pokemon Stadium had. Double battles were also introduced in this game, and despite having a limited selection pool of Pokemon, it can make for very interesting techniques and playstyles, depending on what strategy you go for. Helping Hand is a nice move to use for battles like these, as it was a move designed purely for double battles, but it's also annoying to fight through. It was nice to see more of a spotlight on this battle style, since the GBA Hoenn games didn't really capitalize on this much. Scratch for a few battles. Still, I prefer double battles over single battles. They look pretty cool in this game. Because Colosseum had better animation, even though the game is more than a decade older, each move that was used had impact. It had that tinge of worry, dread that your Pokemon would go through pain just because of your own incompetence to properly use the right moves. I do feel challenged in this game, even if I have the upper hand with type advantages, but that's what also made this game fun. Each time I fell down, I wanted to get right back up and start over again. The art style in this game is beautiful. I already mentioned how dreary and moody the Ore region feels. The more angular and brash character design philosophy that was used for Wes and many of the allies and villains he comes face to face with really works well in this game. I actually got my hands on the official art book for this game, known as The Art of Pokemon Colosseum. It showcases the 3D renders of all possible Pokemon you can encounter in this game, and then also has drawings of some of the concept art for the Cypher admins, peons, and just characters in general. It's a nice book to peruse through, and definitely worth the purchase if you like the art style of this game like I did. The art book also came with the regular Prima guide, which admittedly wouldn't be looked down upon if you use it for this game. Trust me, you might need it later on in game, as the guide gives you a good detailing of every trainer you ever face in this game. The graphics in general look pretty nice. For 2003, not too shabby. Even the trees look nice. Suck it, Sword and Shield. Despite the game being about Pokemon, yet having a contrasting dark and moody environment, it never felt uncanny, even with the brightly shaded Pokemon models. The characters look stunning, and feel alive as they throw out their Pokeballs. The actual Pokemon themselves, the Gen 3 Pokemon at least, look rather well. It's clear their models are much newer and were made for this game, but as for the others, well, it would be silly of me to glorify Colosseum without even mentioning its clear and genuine flaws that a lot of gamers dislike about this game. In my past videos, when I talk about video games, or even shows for that matter, I purposely stray away from all the negatives as I want to uplift whatever media I'm talking about to be interesting enough for the viewer to then consume. After all, I make these videos not only to give my opinion, but to also help people get into the things that I like. But today I promise to uphold a well-rounded critique of a game that I'm incredibly biased against, and purposely discuss its flaws. I feel it's important to talk about these things, otherwise I would be painting a false picture, one without all of its color. Firstly, I did mention how the variety of Pokemon available to you is rather limited, which I find okay. What I'm not a fan of is how even the enemy Pokemon are pretty limited as well. Damn, I'm so tired of seeing all the Johto and Hoenn Pokemon. There are hardly any Kanto Pokemon you get to fight. Forget about snagging. Most Shadow Pokemon, again, are Johto and Hoenn. I'm aware this game was made to advertise the new Hoenn Pokemon in full 3D. But what about Kanto? I'm no Gen 1er, I just found it odd that the game chose to neglect a lot of these Pokemon. Except of course for the popular Kanto Pokemon that do show up in the Hoenn games. But we're still missing Pokemon like Charizard or even Cloyster. The only reason I can honestly think of, and it definitely shows anyways with the many Pokemon in this game, some of the models are terribly outdated, even for its time. I talked about how I love the art style of this game, and found the angular style and darker colors to be unique for Pokemon, but the actual in-game Pokemon models you get to play around with throughout all the battles you experience in this game showcase both new and old models. The new being Hoenn, and the old being anything before that. It's really obvious that Genius Sonority worked on the Hoenn models, and then rehashed the rest of the in-game models from Pokemon Stadium 2, with some exceptions. One model I recognized that was different was Ampharos. Also, Electabuzz was given 6 fingers by mistake in Pokemon Stadium, but this was fixed in Pokemon Colosseum, despite Electabuzz never actually showing up in the actual game anyways. His data is still in the game though, in case you somehow transferred him from the GBA titles. And this Pokemon actually does become a Shadow Pokemon in Colosseum's sequel. These models really don't hold up well, especially when compared to the Gen 3 models that were made just in time for this game. I mean, you can tell the difference. Also, I praised how alive the models were, but damn. Sometimes these Pokemon models can get too alive. Just stop moving already and attack. Good. Okay. Now just kill it. Sweet. Damn, just die already! Yeah, so obviously I don't, I know that came out kind of off, but you know what I mean. Like, in terms of the animations, they just take way too long in this game. Seriously though, some of these moves take forever to do damage. It's just like I have to sit here and watch Umbreon take forever to crunch. This problem is further accentuated by the fact that there are so many battles you have to go through. You get tired of seeing some of the same Pokemon animations over and over again. This is something I like about the newer Pokemon games actually, as they've sped up the battles tremendously, but I don't think it was worth it at the cost of any life or visible movement in any of these newer 3D models. Also, entering tournament battles can be good for leveling up your Pokemon, but also for making money. Money is something you'll run short on many times in this game, and you really need to make sure you have enough Pokeballs and healing items to survive in-game, and catch as many Shadow Pokemon as you can. If you run out of balls, it's over and you have to kill the Shadow Pokemon. Money is actually pretty hard to make in this game, and you're not given a lot to start with in the first place, so conserving what you've got and not losing are very important for this game. But easy to mess up since the AI is pretty hard. Since they usually get access to a better selection of Pokemon anyways, the odds aren't really in your favor. Shadow Pokemon were also a big problem. While being a cool gimmick, they came with a lot of issues, Shadow Rush being one of them. It's also really repetitive when purifying the actual Shadow Pokemon, as the wall glitch I showed you earlier isn't really efficient. Like, do I really have to keep doing this glitch for purification for all 48 Pokemon? Or even if I try the other methods, it's just stupid when you think about it. It's annoying that I have to keep coming back to a gate village here in order to purify at this stone tablet. I can't just magically purify the Pokemon at any other location, and I have to go out of my way to find this tablet 48 separate times, just to purify each and every Shadow Pokemon. It's really tedious, and I just felt that Shadow Pokemon in general could have had more polish, and a much better system for purifying them. Cool idea, but not as developed as I could have hoped for. Man, purifying all these guys took forever. Fuck. Was it worth it? Some of these guys aren't even that great, and I'll never use them. Except Ursaring. Man, that guy's ballin'. Keep in mind though, a lot of these issues I mentioned do get fixed in the game's sequel, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, which is arguably the definitive title in this duology. It's got a better selection of Shadow Pokemon, actual wild Pokemon, better graphics, and even a new convoluted system for purifying Shadow Pokemon in bulk, as there are more Shadow Pokemon to purify in that game. But yeah, that's a talk for another day. Still though, XD Gale of Darkness did a phenomenal job fixing those kinds of issues, yet I still feel more for Colosseum. Perhaps it was because this was my first 3D Pokemon game, or perhaps I wasn't a fan of the departure from the grittier character looks Colosseum had, especially with environments like the Under, a place that becomes completely inaccessible in XD. But I think I'm just heavily biased, since I played Colosseum first. That, and Wes's character design is badass, compared to the scrawny kid. Maybe it's mean to talk about Game Freak and the Pokemon Company with so much disdain. I really don't mean things personally. I don't know what the lives are like for these employees, or social media interns who have to face hate from fans who think like me. I feel that the quality of Pokemon games, mainline games especially, have really dipped down in the past few years. I would go as far as saying as I'm even appalled by the nature of some of these games, and how Game Freak's style of developing has changed. I still like some things about Sword and Shield. I also think Let's Go is a very polished and beautiful looking game on the Switch. But these console games don't have what I want. They don't have that charm, the intrigue, the risk, that snazzy appeal that the earlier Pokemon games had, and especially Colosseum, which emphasized that the most for me. I figured the reason Genius Sonority eventually stopped developing 3D Pokemon games and got demoted to more simple and obscure spin-off titles was probably because of fear. Game Freak was afraid of getting owned by a smaller and more passionate gaming company for an IP that they made. It makes sense in theory, but maybe I shouldn't jump to conclusions. Still, I miss this. I miss Pokemon games that were so inventive and took off with many interesting and creative design choices. Even if it was risky, even if it was dangerous to try out too many things at once. I loved how Colosseum managed to do that, and still impress me 17 years later. I understand that mechanically Colosseum just isn't there, and it pales in comparison to any of the features from the mainline games. The reason why I like it so much is simply because of the emphasis on a darker storyline, art style, and game world. When I play JRPGs, Pokemon especially, story is always on my mind. Usually I can ignore this if the story is practically non-existent, as long as the gameplay is fun. But there are times when a story can really influence my decision on whether or not I want to play a game fully completed 100%. And this game's story knocked it out of the park for me. This isn't like the most flawless story out there, but it's very entertaining to play through, and very new and inventive, unlike the usual Gym Leader challenge. I felt stoked to uncover more of Team Cypher and Snag'em's crimes, and help them get into jail if possible. It was fun to witness the semi-more serious Team Rocket in action, and I was very engaged into the story, enough to ignore the gameplay flaws that I mentioned earlier to a great degree. I know that gameplay is 90% of the experience for JRPGs, but if the story is there and damn good, it'll definitely only add to the experience. Despite whatever criticisms I brought up with this game, they didn't detriment my overall experience I had with Colosseum, and I was able to overlook them whenever I replayed this game for the 20th time. However, I do know they exist, and it's okay. For me at least. They're not enough to ruin the game for me. Some of the issues I mentioned with Colosseum's selection with Pokemon can be fixed if you play ROM hacks. Fan mods, whatever you call them. They can make the game a lot more fun as you can play with a better team of Pokemon in this 3D world. But at the same time, it makes the game that much harder, since your enemies could have legendaries and or tougher Pokemon. Randomizers emphasize on this, since you really don't know what's going to happen. But they're a lot of fun. I'm not a big fan of randomizers that also randomize the typings of the Pokemon too. That's confusing as fuck. But personally for me, ROM hacks help keep the longevity of these games, and I enjoy playing through them. I'll put a link in the description in case you're interested in checking out a ROM hack I'm currently playing right now on the screen, which is known as Pokemon Mausoleum. XD Gale of Darkness, this game's sequel, also had a ROM hack too, a very famous and incredible one at that. I may make a video later down the line discussing this ROM hack, as it was very fun to play. Yeah, so I guess my favorite brand of Pokemon games would just have to be the Shadow Pokemon series. Pokemon Colosseum and its younger brother, XD Gale of Darkness. Phenomenal games. I know a lot of people don't really consider these games to be the greatest Pokemon games of all time. They're good spin-offs, but saying they're the greatest is kind of going a bit too far for a lot of people, I know. And like I said earlier, Pokemon Heart Gold is actually my favorite main series Pokemon game, but overall I would have to say these games are my favorite. I love the game world, I love the art direction, and something else I didn't really talk about that I also like is the music. Oh, the music is so good in this game. I actually had a whole cover I wanted to do with my violin. I wanted to do a medley with some different songs from Pokemon Colosseum. But unfortunately what happened was I was practicing, and in light of this video I wanted to do a performance, and the bridge on the violin just kind of shattered while I was practicing, probably because it was too much stress on it. I haven't really I actually never really like adjusted the bridge. I didn't notice it was slowly tilting down. I'm talking about like the bridge on the violin. I don't have my violin with me right now because I gave it to a shop that's like 40 minutes away from my house. So they're fixing it right now, but yeah, it really sucks that this happened. But regardless, I just wanted to say that to people who worked on this game, and especially the music composer for this franchise, Tsukasa Tawada, or Tawada-san, I can't pronounce it, sorry. Uh, just wanted to say, arigatou gozaimashita. Very, very appreciative for your efforts and the awesomeness you put into these games. So, yeah, have a great day. See you later, guys, and I hope you enjoyed my video. Sorry it was very long, but I just wanted to talk about my favorite Pokemon game of all time and kind of just give a rundown of my favorite parts of the game. Catch you on the flip side. Thanks, and have a great day.